recording. I think a lot of you know I've had spent an obnoxious number of years in school, right? I've done seminary and grad school and seminary again. So I've taken a lot of tests in my life. And, there's a distinctly different feeling that I at least get, and I assume others, when I sit down in front of a test, if I see a question and then 3 or 4 or 5, answers with little bubbles to fill in, that's a different feeling than when I sit down and look at a test and it's a question with a whole bunch of blank space that I'm supposed to fill up and write a big essay about it, right? Most people, I think, prefer multiple choice questions to essay questions because with multiple choice, it's an answer takes 2 seconds to fill in the bubble. And even if you have no idea what the answer is, you've still got a 1 in 3 or 4 or 5 chance that you're going to get it right. And even better, if it's true false, you have a 50-50 chance of getting it right, even if you didn't study at all. And that's the kind of question the Pharisees are bringing to Jesus, right? This very basic, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar? True or false? And all Jesus has to do is circle one, boom, on to the next question. He's done. It's a simple true false quiz. But that, of course, is not what Jesus does because he knows this isn't really a simple true false question. It's one of those trick questions where the answer is actually all of the above or none of the above, or if you ever had one of those really clever teachers who put in the directions at the top of the test to just write your name in the bottom left-hand corner and turn the test in without answering any questions, just to see who actually read the directions to the test, right? This is a trick question. This is a trick test. Jesus was aware of their malice, is what Matthew says. And so, because Jesus is aware of their malice, that they don't have good intentions with their question, he doesn't just circle true or false. He asks them a question. Why are you putting me to the test? And of course, there is a difference between taking a test and being put to the test. Jesus knows he's being put to the test. And so he says, show me the coin used for the tax. Now, the tax in question was a head tax, a poll tax that Rome imposed when they conquered the region. And so every year, each Jewish person was expected to pay this set amount. Reverend Dr. Ruth Hamilton put it well. I liked how she said that they had to pay this tax for the privilege of being a subject of the Roman Empire. Right? That's what the tax was for. The coin in question was a denarius, which is equal to about an average wage for a laborer for the day. And the denarius bore the image on one side, the image of the emperor, and on the other side, it bore the title of the emperor, Tiberius Caesar August, son of the divine Augustus, most high priest. So do you catch all that? Right? The divine Augustus, most high priest. This coin was considered idolatrous because of the image it bore and blasphemous because it attributed divinity to an earthly figure, to Augustus, someone who is not God. So one might wonder why the Pharisee would even carry such a coin, let alone why he would take this graven image, this blasphemous title, into the temple, which is where they're having this dialogue. And one might also wonder if Jesus isn't turning the tables and testing the Pharisees by asking them to show him the coin, to see and to show those watching that these religious leaders are not following their own rules. He calls them hypocrites, and he shows they're hypocrites when they pull that denarius out of their pocket in the temple. Because we don't really need to see the coin to know whose image is on it. There's not a show and tell required. Everyone could have answered that question without seeing the coin, right? Whose head and whose title. And I'm not sure if the Pharisees don't realize they are also being put to the test, or if they're just so relieved Jesus is asking such a straightforward, simple, short answer question, whose image and whose title is there, that they're like, oh, we know, that's Caesar's, the emperor's. Right, they have 100% on their test so far, the emperor's title. And then Jesus transforms this true false question into an essay question. Right? Give therefore to Caesar's the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And the most obvious essay question that's inherent in Jesus' response here, the thing that comes to mind first, I think, is what? What are the things that are the emperor's, and what are the things that are God's? Is Jesus saying the money belongs to Caesar because it has his image? And Jesus is clearly implying that while Rome demands money, there are many aspects of people's lives that belong to God and not to Rome. What belongs to the emperor and what belongs to God? I realized in reading commentary about this passage that this question is much more difficult to answer for a lot of people who aren't Anabaptist. I feel like as Mennonites, as Anabaptists, we have a fairly straightforward answer to this question that really not much of anything is truly the emperor's, right? That is, it's all God's. Maybe it's one of those trick questions. Hopefully we don't lose our tax exempt status for me saying that nothing belongs to the government. But to me, what is God's and what is Caesar's isn't actually the most difficult question that is brought up with Jesus' reply here. There's a secondary question that Jesus' response implies that I really hadn't thought about before, but this week it's the one I've been stuck on. And that's the question of, how do we give to God the things that are God's? I mean, assuming that the empire deserves some money, some tax payment, it's pretty easy to know how to pay our taxes. We might question whether or why or how much, but how to pay the emperor, what is the emperor's, how to pay taxes is easy. They make it easy on purpose, right? You can have it deducted from your paycheck. You can go online and pay it. You can go old school and write a paper check and stick it in the mail with the stamp. It's easy to know how to give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's. But how do we give anything to God? The most prominent thing in this passage, of course, is the question of money. How do we give money to God? I mean, we'll pass around the baskets at in-person worship. There's links online that you can go to donate to the church for Zoom worshipers. But I have to be honest, I mean, we don't often talk about this, but we all know that a whole lot of the money that you all give to the church comes to me to pay my salary. And so I actually realized it feels pretty presumptuous for me to sit here and tell you that giving money to the church is giving to God, because I'm not God and lots of the money you give to the church comes to me. So is giving money to the church the same thing as giving money to God? Or what about other faith-based organizations we might give money to? Justice Matters, Dismantling the Doctrine of Discovery, Family Promise, Link, Mennonite Disaster Services, Western District Conference. Are we giving money to God when we donate to places like that, or when we donate to non-religious groups that are still doing godly work in the world, right? Just Food, the Community Shelter, the Bail Fund, Harvest Health, Heartland Health, or what about organizations that just enhance our communities, right? Theater Lawrence and the Art Center and all those candy bars you buy from neighbors and nephews and grandkids for their bands and orchestras and sports teams. Is that giving to God when we're supporting the life of our community? or when we're taking care of our family and paying our bills and putting a roof over our partners, our kids' heads? Or what about caring for ourselves when I pay my monthly gym membership? Is that giving to God things that are God's? It's, I don't know. God doesn't have an address where I can just write a check. We have to figure out what is the best way we can find to give to God, and what does that look like in the world? And then there's another piece of this. Even though the question is specifically about money, Jesus really expands it because he asks about the image, whose image is on the coin. And for first century Jewish people, when they hear the term image, they're thinking of Genesis. They are thinking of humanity created in the image of God. If we owe the emperor money because the emperor's image is on the coin, then we owe God ourselves because God's image is on us. And what does that look like, to give ourselves to God? When I was in upper elementary, middle school, somewhere in there, I watched a made-for-TV movie about these nuns who were missionaries in El Salvador, and they were brutally murdered. And I just thought that was the best thing ever, that I had to go be a missionary and, I don't know, at least be willing to be murdered, to be giving myself to God. You might not be surprised to know I had a bit of a flair for the dramatic in my teenage years, but that was my idea of what it was to give yourself to God. And as I, grew up, I shifted my understanding of what it means to live a faithful life, to give myself to God. And now I am trying to give my life to God as a pastor, as a writer, as a wife, and a mother. And honestly, sometimes, not always, but sometimes being a pastor actually feels like kind of a cushy job. And I think about others who are doing what feels like a whole lot more, really, to give their lives to God. The teachers and social workers and journalists and nurses and doctors and the engineers who make sure that the bridge doesn't collapse when I'm driving over it, and farmers who grow my food, and people who make music and art. I expect there are as many ways for us to give our lives to God as there are people with lives to give. So how exactly do we give ourselves to God? What does that look like? That's not a question for me to answer for you at all, certainly not to answer this morning, but it's one that's worth thinking about. And as I've lived with this passage over the past few days, I've really come to appreciate it on a lot of levels. I appreciate the reminder here that we bear God's image, and that means that it is God who has a claim on our lives, not the systems of empire that try to demand our allegiance. I appreciate the challenging questions that this passage brings up of how we give our money and ourselves to God. I appreciate the questions, even if the answers are long form essay and not fill in the bubble kind of answers. And there's something else I appreciate, I think, especially with this week, the past few weeks, news cycle, this heartbreaking conflict between Israel and Palestine, the seemingly impossible standoff in the House of Representatives. I just really appreciate Jesus' refusal to answer a contrived true-false question. I appreciate that Jesus is not playing the game that the Pharisees are trying to make him play. He is not taking their litmus test. For important questions of faith, questions of peace and justice and compassion and integrity, we can't simply check a box and be done with it. Just as with so many questions that arise in our personal lives, the questions that we confront in the face of violence and conflict around the world and in our own country, these are not multiple choice questions. These are essay questions, right? These aren't what questions, but they're why and how and what now questions. And we don't have the time to delve into the Israel-Palestine conflict. I do hope you had a chance to read some of the statements that were linked in this week's email newsletter. I'm very grateful for people who have taken the time to pray and think through and offer some words to help process some of that. I certainly don't have the bandwidth or any desire to talk about the House of Representatives mess this morning. I heard that there was a school field trip, third graders watching one of the failed Speaker of the House votes, and one of the third graders announced that this was the worst field trip ever, which I believe. It is hard to even, we're not going to get into all that. I just want to invite you to appreciate that Jesus gives us permission to refuse to answer true-false questions. That like Jesus, we can call out the malice and the hypocrisy and the deceit and the disingenuousness when we see it. That we can refuse to be put to the test. That we can answer questions with even more questions, and then sit with Jesus and with each other in the midst of the struggle and the uncertainty. Thanks be to God.